Story 1. Endless Exit. It started as an ordinary road trip, one of those spontaneous adventures you plan on a whim, eager to escape the monotony of everyday life. Sam, Katie, and I had packed our bags, filled the tank, and hit the open road with a sense of freedom and excitement. We had no particular destination in mind, just a vague idea of exploring some scenic routes and quirky roadside attractions. Our journey took a strange turn on the third day. We were somewhere in the heart of the Midwest, surrounded by endless fields and open sky, when we decided to take a detour. Katie spotted a weathered sign for an old scenic route that promised breathtaking views and charming little towns. It seemed like the perfect escape from the monotony of the interstate. The road was narrow and winding, bordered by dense woods that seemed to close in around us the further we went. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. As the day turned to dusk, a thick fog rolled in, shrouding the landscape in a ghostly white. "This is kind of creepy," Sam said, glancing at the encroaching mist. "Yeah, but it's beautiful in a weird way," Katie replied, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. We drove on in silence, the fog growing thicker with each passing mile. The trees on either side of us became indistinct shapes, looming like silent sentinels. The road, once clearly marked, now seemed to twist and turn unpredictably. Our sense of direction became muddled, and unease settled over us like the fog outside. "Are we lost?" I finally asked, breaking the oppressive silence. "No," Katie said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We just need to find the next turnoff." But there was no next turnoff. The road stretched on, an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the mist. Hours passed, and the same trees, the same bends, seemed to repeat themselves over and over. A growing sense of dread gnawed at my gut. "We should have hit a town by now," Sam muttered, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. "We'll find something soon," Katie said, though her tone was more hopeful than certain. As night fell, the fog seemed to thicken, becoming almost tangible. The headlights of the car barely penetrated the gloom, casting weak, distorted beams that made the shadows dance menacingly around us. A sign loomed ahead, barely visible through the mist. Finally, I sighed with relief. "What does it say?" Katie squinted at the sign as we passed. "Exit 13. But we just passed exit 13 an hour ago." "That can't be right," Sam said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Maybe it's a different exit 13. But deep down, we all knew it wasn't. The same exit, the same twisted trees, the same oppressive fog. It was as if we were caught in some nightmarish loop. Panic began to set in, a cold, clammy feeling that seeped into my bones. "We need to turn around," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe we missed something." Sam nodded, making a shaky U-turn. We drove back the way we came, but the scenery remained unchanged. The same exit signs, the same bends in the road, the same choking fog. It was as if the road itself had become a trap, refusing to let us go. "We can't be going in circles," Katie whispered, fear evident in her eyes. "We've been driving straight." The car's clock showed 2 a.m., but time had lost all meaning. We were exhausted, nerves frayed, minds teetering on the edge of hysteria. The fog seemed almost alive now, writhing and twisting around us, obscuring reality. "Look," Sam shouted, pointing ahead. In the distance, barely visible through the swirling mist, was a figure standing in the middle of the road. Sam slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. The figure remained motionless, shrouded in darkness. "Who's that?" Katie asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, dread pooling in my stomach. We sat there, paralyzed by fear, as the figure slowly began to move. It walked toward us with a jerky, unnatural gait, its features obscured by the fog. As it drew closer, a sense of overwhelming wrongness enveloped us. "Let's get out of here," Sam said, fumbling to shift the car into reverse, but the engine sputtered and died, plunging us into darkness. The figure was almost upon us now, its presence a suffocating weight. Desperation clawed at my throat as I fumbled with the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Why won't it open?" Katie cried, tears streaming down her face. The figure stopped just outside the driver's window. Sam's face was a mask of terror as he stared at it, unable to look away. Slowly, the figure raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. The hand was pale, almost skeletal, with long, twisted fingers that left a smear of something dark and oily on the window. A sound like static filled the car, a low, droning hum that vibrated through my skull. The figure leaned in closer, and through the fogged glass, I could just make out its eyes. Black, bottomless pits that seemed to draw in all light and hope. In that moment, a cold realization washed over me. We were never going to leave this road. This endless, fog-shrouded nightmare was our new reality. The figure outside was just the beginning, a harbinger of the horrors yet to come. The fog closed in, swallowing us whole, and the last thing I heard was the sound of our own terrified screams echoing into the void. Story 2. Silent Gridlock. Our road trip began like any other, a weekend escape from the grind, a chance to reconnect with friends. The plan was simple. Drive through the countryside, visit a few small towns, and enjoy the open road. Everything was going smoothly until we hit the traffic jam. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the landscape. As we rounded a bend, we saw the line of cars ahead, stretching out of sight. "Looks like some kind of accident," John said from the driver's seat. "Maybe we should turn around," Sarah suggested, leaning forward from the back seat. But the road was narrow, and there was no room to maneuver. We were stuck. "Let's just wait it out," I said, trying to stay optimistic. "It can't be that bad." Minutes turned into hours. The sky darkened, and the traffic remained at a standstill. There was no sign of movement ahead or behind us. It was as if the world had come to a halt. "What's going on?" John muttered, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "Shouldn't there be police or something?" Sarah asked, glancing around nervously. A chill crept over me. The other cars were eerily quiet. There were no honking horns, no frustrated drivers shouting at each other. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. "I'm going to check it out," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Maybe I can see what's causing the delay." John and Sarah nodded, their faces tense. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air prickling my skin. The headlights of the cars ahead cast long, distorted shadows, making the scene feel like something out of a nightmare. I walked along the line of cars, peering into windows. Each vehicle was empty. The driver's seats were vacant, doors closed, as if everyone had simply vanished. A creeping sense of dread washed over me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. No response, just the silent, unmoving cars. I hurried back to our vehicle, my heart pounding. "Guys, something's wrong. All the cars are empty." "Empty?" John repeated, his eyes widening. "Yeah, like everyone just disappeared." Sarah's face paled. "We need to get out of here." John nodded, starting the car. But as he put it into gear, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, but it was useless. The car refused to start. "Great," he muttered. "Now what?" I looked around, feeling the walls of the forest closing in on us. "Let's walk. Maybe we can find help." We grabbed our phones and flashlights, stepping into the darkness. The road stretched out before us, a corridor of shadows and silence. As we walked, the forest seemed to grow denser, the trees pressing in on either side. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. We stopped, listening. At first, there was nothing but the rustle of leaves. Then, faintly, we heard it. A low, droning hum, like distant static. "What is that?" John asked, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know," I said, my mouth dry. "But we need to keep moving." The sound grew louder as we walked, a maddening drone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. I could feel eyes on us, unseen watchers in the darkness. Suddenly, the hum cut out, leaving a deafening silence. We stopped again, our breaths ragged. "Where are we?" Sarah whimpered. "This isn't right." The road ahead was different. The cars were gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of fog. We turned around, but the way back was blocked by the same fog. We were trapped. "Keep moving," I urged, though my legs felt like lead. "We have to find a way out." As we stepped into the fog, it clung to us like a living thing, cold and damp. The droning sound returned louder than ever, drilling into our skulls. Shapes moved within the mist, flickering at the edges of our vision. "Don't look," I whispered, gripping John's arm. "Just keep going." But it was too late. Sarah screamed, her flashlight dropping to the ground. In the brief, flickering light, I saw them, figures emerging from the fog, their faces blank and featureless. "Run!" John shouted, pulling me forward. We sprinted through the fog, but the figures were everywhere, closing in on us. The droning sound grew unbearable, a cacophony of despair. I stumbled, my flashlight slipping from my grasp. As I fell, I looked up and saw the figures standing over us, their hollow eyes staring into my soul. The last thing I heard was the sound of our own terrified screams, echoing into the endless night. In the morning, the road was clear. The cars had vanished, leaving no trace of the traffic jam. And somewhere, deep in the forest, the droning hum continued, waiting for its next victims. Story 3. Reflections of Dread. It was supposed to be a simple stop for the night. We had been driving for hours, the fatigue gnawing at our senses, and the old roadside motel seemed like a beacon of relief. The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow on the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was far from inviting, but it was late, and we were too tired to be picky. "Looks like something out of a horror movie," Mark joked, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, but it's either this or sleeping in the car," I replied, my voice betraying a hint of unease. The motel lobby was empty, save for a dusty reception desk and a grimy bell. I rang it, and an elderly man appeared from the back room, his eyes dull and lifeless. He handed us a key without a word, and we made our way to room 13. Of course, it had to be room 13, Emma said, rolling her eyes as she pushed the door open. The room was musty, the air heavy with the scent of mildew. The decor was dated, the wallpaper peeling in places, but it was clean enough. A large mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed, reflecting the dim light of the single bedside lamp. "This'll do," Mark said, dropping his bag on the floor. Let's just get some rest and hit the road early. We settled in, the exhaustion pulling us into a heavy silence. As I unpacked my toiletries in the small bathroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mirror above the sink seemed to distort my reflection slightly. A trick of the poor lighting, I told myself. Back in the room, Emma was already under the covers, her back turned to the mirror. I glanced at it uneasily, noticing a strange shimmer on its surface. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, I climbed into bed beside her, my eyes heavy with sleep. I woke in the middle of the night, an uneasy feeling gripping my chest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the parking lot outside. I turned over and saw Mark standing by the mirror, staring at his reflection. "Mark? What are you doing?" I whispered, but he didn't respond. Chill ran down my spine. His reflection seemed wrong, distorted, like in a funhouse mirror. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his mouth moved as if he were whispering something, but no sound came out. "Mark!" I called out louder, and he finally turned to face me. His expression was blank, his eyes glassy. I don't know," he stammered, shaking his head as if to clear it. I couldn't stop looking. "Go back to bed," I said, my voice trembling. "It's just a mirror." He nodded and climbed back under the covers, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that distorted reflection, those empty eyes staring back at me. Morning came slowly, the pale light seeping through the thin curtains. We packed up quickly, eager to leave the oppressive atmosphere of the motel. As we headed for the door, I took one last glance at the mirror. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing behind us in the reflection. But when I turned around, the room was empty. "Let's get out of here," Emma said, her voice tight with anxiety. We checked out and hit the road, the unease lingering like a dark cloud. As we drove, Mark was unusually quiet, his eyes distant. "Are you okay?" I asked, glancing at him. I can't stop thinking about that mirror," he admitted. "It felt like it was watching me." "Mirrors can be creepy," Emma said, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's probably just our minds playing tricks on us." But as the day wore on, Mark's behavior grew more erratic. He kept glancing at his reflection in the car's rearview mirror, his eyes darting nervously. "I keep seeing something," he muttered. "In the mirror. It's not me." We stopped for lunch at a diner, hoping a break would help. Mark went to the restroom, and when he didn't return, I went to check on him. I found him standing in front of the bathroom mirror, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Mark, what's wrong?" I asked, but he just shook his head, unable to speak. As we drove on, the tension in the car was palpable. Mark's paranoia grew, and he refused to look in any mirrors. That night, we found another motel, this one slightly less dilapidated than the last. But as soon as we entered the room, Mark froze, his eyes fixed on the mirror on the wall. "It's here," he whispered. "It's been following us." We covered the mirror with a towel, hoping to ease his mind, but it was no use. That night, I woke to find Mark standing by the covered mirror, his hands trembling. "It's not the mirror," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's what's inside it." Before I could react, he tore the towel away, and for a split second, I saw it too. A dark, twisted figure lurking just behind our reflections, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. The next morning, Mark was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, just gone. The police found no clues, no leads. Emma and I were left with the haunting realization that whatever was in that mirror had taken him. Now, every time I see a mirror, I feel a cold dread. I can't help but glance over my shoulder, fearing what might be lurking just out of sight, waiting for its next victim. And every time, I see it. Just a flicker, a shadow. But I know it's there, watching, waiting.